Two officers thought they were flexing their authority on a woman in a diner parking lot. Less than 24 hours later, she was standing in front of them as their new chief of police. The late afternoon sun was a low, burning disk over Highway 41, casting long, stark shadows across the cracked pavement of the Redwood Junction diner. The air was thick with a clinging heat, making cars shimmer and metal door handles too hot to touch. A faint, oily scent of fried food wafted from the kitchen's open vents. Simone Trenholm guided her charcoal-gray sedan into a space near the far edge of the lot. She had been driving for hours, the kind of journey where the steady road hum gets into your bones and the world outside becomes a blur. Her linen blouse was stuck to her back and her hair, pinned loosely to escape the heat, felt heavy. On the passenger seat lay a worn leather satchel, containing the documents she needed to sign before officially beginning her new position tomorrow. This was supposed to be a quick stop. A turkey sandwich, maybe a slice of pie and a coffee to power her through the final leg to her motel. She reached for the keys to lock the car, but the harsh crunch of tires on gravel made her glance up. A black and white patrol cruiser swung into the lot fast, almost cutting a half-circle around her car before screeching to a halt 2 spaces over. The engine idled loudly. Inside, Sergeant Colby Renwick sat in the driver's seat, his thick forearm resting on the open window. Mirrored sunglasses flashed in the sunlight, shooting cold glints back at her. Beside him, Officer Travis Blaine leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, a restless energy about him as if he was desperate to speak. Renwick's voice came first, deep and slow, laced with a familiar, condescending edge. "Well, look what we got here," he called out as if she were a misplaced object. "You lost, sweetheart? This ain't exactly your part of town." Blaine gave a dry, rattling chuckle and let his gaze slide from her shoes all the way up to her face, finally settling on her car. "Nice ride for someone just passing through," he added, his words drawn out just enough to sound more like a veiled threat than a compliment. Simone remained by the open door, one hand on the sedan's roof, her satchel clutched in the other. She had faced worse in her life, far worse, but the cold absence of a smile on their faces told her this was more than an idle chat. Renwick tilted his head. "You might want to be careful hanging around here. Locals don't always take kindly to strangers." He spoke the word locals like it held special, exclusive meaning. Her eyes didn't waver from his sunglasses, though he couldn't fully see hers. "I'll keep that in mind," she said evenly, her voice level and entirely without apology. That response didn't sit well with them. Blaine's smirk faltered for a second as if he'd expected her to retreat, to give them a reason to escalate. Instead, she swung the car door shut with a solid click and walked toward the diner without another look in their direction. She could hear them laughing as she stepped inside, but she didn't turn back. The cool blast of air conditioning was a welcome shock, mixing with the sharp smell of fried onions and old coffee. She scanned the counter for an open stool, aware of eyes on her from a quiet corner of the room. This wasn't the look of a curious local, but the kind of gaze that measures you, already deciding what category you fall into. She took a seat near the end of the counter, ordered her food quickly, and kept her eyes on the menu board long after she'd memorized it. Through the wide front windows, the cruiser was still there. Renwick was now leaning back in his seat, one arm draped over the steering wheel, talking to Blaine in low tones. Every so often, one of them would glance toward the diner door as if expecting her to come back out. Simone's coffee arrived. She wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat steady her. The first sip was bitter, but it calmed her pulse. There were larger matters on her mind than 2 patrol officers with small-town power trips, but the encounter still lingered, a stubborn bookmark she couldn't quite remove. She finished half her sandwich, paid with a 20, and left a few bills under the plate for the waitress. Outside, the air felt even heavier than before. The cruiser was gone now, but the fresh tire marks near her car were a silent reminder. She unlocked the door, slid behind the wheel and started the engine. The last light of the sun was sinking toward the tree line as she pulled out of the lot. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, but her grip on the steering wheel was just a little tighter. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she wouldn't be just a stranger passing through. But the last thing those 2 officers expected was that the next time they saw her, she'd be in a position to change their entire world. The door closed behind Simone with a soft thud, sealing her off from the heat and the glare outside. Inside, the Redwood Junction diner was a mix of faded charm and quiet suspicion. The red vinyl booths were worn smooth from years of customers. The linoleum floor was scarred with scuff marks, and the air was thick with the scent of grilled meat, fryer oil, and coffee that had likely been brewing for hours. A waitress in her late 50s, name tag reading Gloria Henshaw, looked up from the coffee station. Her blonde hair was a neat, teased helmet, and she had the air of a woman who'd seen it all but had no desire to pretend otherwise. "Counter or booth?" she asked, her voice flat. "Counter's fine," Simone replied, keeping her voice light. Gloria nodded toward the far end, away from the few other patrons. A young couple sat in a booth near the window, sharing fries, and two older men in baseball caps were hunched over mugs as if guarding secrets. All of them glanced at Simone for a beat longer than was strictly polite. She settled onto a stool, placing her satchel on the counter. Gloria poured her a cup of coffee without asking, sliding it over with a small clink. "You just passing through?" Gloria asked, her eyes not quite meeting hers. "Something like that," Simone answered. She didn't elaborate and Gloria didn't press. A plate clattered in the kitchen, followed by the hiss of something hitting hot oil. Simone let the sounds wash over her, trying to ease into the moment, but her attention kept drifting to the wide front windows where the cruiser sat motionless. Renwick and Blaine were still inside, angled so they could see the diner door. Every so often Renwick adjusted his sunglasses, and she could tell even from here that he was watching. Gloria came back, pad in hand. "What'll it be?" "Turkey club and fries. That's all." "You got it." As Gloria walked off, Simone's eyes flicked to the couple in the booth. The woman leaned in, whispering something to the man, who gave a short laugh and stole another glance in her direction. She knew that look. Not attraction, not curiosity. It was the same look people wore when they thought they had you figured out before you'd said a single word. Her coffee was hot and strong, almost too bitter. She drank it slowly, letting the slight burn ground her. 5 minutes later, the front door jingled and the diner's energy shifted. The sound of heavy boots on linoleum carried over the clatter of dishes. Renwick and Blaine had come inside. Gloria's voice tightened as she greeted them. "Afternoon, Sergeant, Officer." "Afternoon, Gloria," Renwick said, taking a booth 2 tables away from Simone. Blaine slid in opposite him, resting his arms on the table as if he were already bored. Simone didn't turn to look, but she didn't need to. She could feel the weight of their presence, loud without a word. Gloria set Simone's plate down, offering a polite but quick smile before retreating. The fries were steaming, the sandwich stacked high. Simone took a deliberate bite, refusing to let her pace be altered by the 2 men who'd tried to rattle her minutes ago, now just over her shoulder. Bits of their conversation drifted over. Nothing direct, just the kind of pointed laughter and low mutters meant to be heard without being clear. A couple of locals stopped by their booth, exchanging easy greetings with Renwick and Blaine, their voices lifting slightly when they mentioned new faces in town. Simone took another sip of coffee, her eyes fixed on the small TV mounted above the counter, which showed muted local news. She caught her own reflection in the screen, calm and steady. She'd dealt with worse than this in her career, but she was making mental notes all the same. The waitress refilled her cup, glancing toward the booth before leaning slightly closer. "They can be a little much sometimes," Gloria murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I can handle it," Simone replied quietly. Gloria gave her a small nod, then moved on. When Simone finished her meal, she pulled a 20 from her wallet, leaving it on the counter without waiting for change. She stood, lifted the satchel onto her shoulder, and walked past Renwick and Blaine without breaking stride. Renwick spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "Enjoy your stay, however long that is." She didn't look at him, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The door jingled again as she stepped outside, the hot air pressing against her like a wall. The cruiser was parked where it had been, a silent reminder of the afternoon's earlier encounter. She got into her car, started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The diner shrank in her rearview mirror. She didn't know yet if the day's events were an isolated incident or a preview of what tomorrow would bring. But in her gut she knew this wasn't the last time she'd see those 2 officers, and the next meeting wouldn't happen on their terms. The Pinecrest Motor Lodge wasn't much to look at from the road. A squat row of doors under a peeling teal awning with a flickering neon vacancy sign that hummed faintly in the heat. Simone pulled into the cracked lot, her tires crunching over stray gravel. She'd booked it for convenience, not charm, and right now convenience was enough. Room 7 was at the far end away from the office. The air inside was stale, tinged with the faint scent of old carpet cleaner and something floral trying to mask it. The window unit rattled to life when she turned it on, blasting lukewarm air that would hopefully get cooler in time. She set her satchel on the small table by the door and eased herself into the single armchair. The cushion gave way as if it had been sat in 1,000 times before. She kicked off her shoes and let the day's weight settle around her. The turkey sandwich had taken the edge off her hunger, but the knot in her stomach hadn't loosened since the diner. On the table sat her phone, a half-empty bottle of water, and the thick folder of onboarding documents from the city. She flipped it open but didn't start reading. Instead, she leaned back and let her mind retrace every detail from the last 2 hours. The cruiser pulling in close, the look behind Renwick's sunglasses, Blaine's smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes, and the calculated pauses in their voices. It wasn't the first time she'd run into that kind of thing. Her years in law enforcement had taught her that some people liked to test boundaries the second they spotted someone new, especially someone they thought they could size up at a glance. But this was different. These weren't strangers at a gas station or passers-by in another city. These were officers in the very department she was about to run. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Marina. "Made it okay? How's the new place?" Simone typed back, "Made it. Motel for now. First day tomorrow." She hesitated before hitting send, considering adding something about the diner. In the end she left it out. Marina worried enough as it was, and Simone didn't want to start her tenure here with second-hand doubts being fed from home. She got up, pulled back the thin curtain and looked out at the parking lot. Her car sat under the sickly glow of a street lamp, a few moths already flitting in its light. Beyond it, the highway stretched both ways, the occasional passing vehicle kicking up little gusts of wind. She sat on the bed, pulled her hair down from its loose pin and rubbed her temples. Tomorrow's introduction was supposed to be straightforward. Meet the mayor, shake hands with the department, set the tone for the months ahead. But now she was walking in with a clear first order of business, showing Renwick and Blaine without a shred of doubt exactly who she was and where she stood. Her stomach tightened again, not from nerves but from the anticipation of playing this out carefully. In her experience, you only get one chance to set the hierarchy in a room. Let someone challenge it on day one and you'd spend months fixing it. She pulled her small notebook from the satchel, the one she carried on every new assignment. On the first page she wrote 3 words in neat block letters: command, respect, clarity. Under that she scribbled a note: assess department culture. Identify fault lines early. The air conditioner had finally cooled the room enough that she could pull the thin blanket over her legs. She kept the lamp on, the light a warm pool in the otherwise shadowy space, and read through the welcome packet the city had mailed her weeks ago. It listed the department's divisions, staff counts, and recent commendations. She scanned for Renwick's and Blaine's names, finding them in the patrol roster. Renwick had been on the force for 12 years, Blaine just over 2. Closing the folder, she let out a long breath. 12 years was long enough for a man like Renwick to think the department moved the way he did. 2 years was short enough for someone like Blaine to decide whose lead to follow. The challenge wasn't just them, it was the influence they carried. Simone leaned over, switched off the lamp and settled into the pillow. Through the thin walls, she could hear a TV in the next room, playing some late-night talk show, the audience laughter faint but constant. She focused instead on the low hum of the air conditioner and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Her last thought before drifting toward sleep was that tomorrow wasn't just the first day of a job. It was the first move in a much larger game and she had no intention of losing. But the morning would prove that the real test wasn't simply walking into that squad room, it was owning it from the moment she crossed the threshold. The next morning broke with a pale, cloudless sky and the kind of stillness that made every sound carry. Simone was up before her alarm, her body already in work mode. She showered, pressed her uniform and pinned her hair neatly, taking her time with the small details. Today wasn't just about appearance, it was about presence. The drive from the Pinecrest Motor Lodge to the precinct took less than 10 minutes. She followed Highway 41 into the center of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, where the streets were lined with small shops, a brick courthouse and a faded movie theater marquee. The precinct itself was a squat, functional building of tan brick and narrow windows, the kind of structure that didn't try to impress anyone. She parked in the small lot at the side, stepping out into air that was still cool from the night. Her boots clicked against the pavement as she approached the entrance. Inside, the front desk officer, nameplate reading Lydia Ortiz, looked up from her computer. "Morning. Can I help you?" Lydia asked, polite but formal. "Yes," Simone said, her voice steady. "I'm here for the morning briefing." Lydia glanced at her uniform, then at the badge clipped to her chest. The realization softened her expression. "Of course. Chief Trenholm, welcome." She stood a little straighter, gesturing toward the hallway. "Squad rooms down the hall, last door on the right." The word chief hung in the air for a moment, but Simone kept moving. Her boots tapped a steady rhythm down the hallway, which was lined with framed commendations, group photos, and a bulletin board cluttered with community event flyers. When she pushed the squad room door open, conversations halted for just a beat before resuming at a lower volume. Around 20 officers sat at long tables arranged in rows, coffee cups in hand, papers spread out in front of them. Some were mid-laugh, some kept their eyes on the table, and a few glanced up to size her up. At the far side of the room, leaning casually against the wall, was Sergeant Colby Renwick. His sunglasses were gone, revealing pale blue eyes that didn't blink when they met hers. Beside him, Officer Travis Blaine was thumbing through a notepad, though his attention was clearly on her. Simone didn't slow her step. She crossed to the front of the room, setting her satchel on the lectern. A low hum of chatter lingered until the door opened again and the mayor stepped inside. Mayor Frank Alderman was a man in his late 60s, with a firm handshake and a habit of smiling with only half his mouth. "Good morning, everyone," Alderman began, his voice carrying easily. "I know you're all eager to get on with your day, but we've got something important first. As most of you know, we've been in the process of selecting a new chief for the department. That process is over. It's my privilege to introduce Chief Simone Trenholm." The murmurs in the room died instantly. Simone could feel the shift in attention as every set of eyes landed on her. Renwick's jaw moved slightly, like he was chewing over the moment. Blaine blinked once, then twice, his pen stilled in his hand. She let the silence hang for just a second before she spoke. "Good morning," she said, her tone even and direct. "Before we get into schedules, patrol assignments, and open cases, I want to start with one thing: respect. It's not just about who wears what rank. It's about how you treat people, on duty, off duty, and before you even know who they are." A couple of chairs shifted, the sound sharp in the quiet room. She didn't raise her voice, but she didn't need to. Her gaze swept the room once, pausing briefly on Renwick and Blaine before moving on. "I'm here to work with you, not against you. But make no mistake, I will hold every person in this department accountable to the same standard I hold myself. We represent this city, and that means our words and actions matter every minute of every day." The mayor gave a small nod of approval before stepping back. "I'll let Chief Trenholm take it from here." Simone outlined a few immediate priorities: community outreach, improving patrol rotation efficiency, and updating training protocols. Her voice never wavered, her stance steady. When she finished, she dismissed them to their daily briefing. Renwick was the last to move, his eyes on her until the very moment he turned toward the door. Blaine followed, his expression less sure than it had been yesterday. As the room emptied, Lydia from the front desk appeared in the doorway. "Chief, your office is ready whenever you are." "Thank you, Lydia," Simone replied, gathering her satchel. She took one last glance at the now empty squad room before heading toward her office, but she knew the real introduction to her department hadn't happened yet. It was coming, and it would be face to face. Simone's new office was modest but functional. A desk facing the door, 2 visitor chairs, filing cabinets along the back wall, and a single window overlooking the side lot. A thin layer of dust on the blinds suggested it hadn't been used much lately. She set her satchel on the desk, straightened a stack of department memos, and took a moment to center herself before the next step. The mayor had kept his part brief in the squad room, letting her speech set the tone. Now came the less public, more telling moments, the ones that would define her early days here. She didn't plan to let them happen by accident. Her computer pinged with a new message. "Renwick and Blaine are in the conference room for roll call. Want to address them?" It was from Lydia. Simone typed back, "I'll be there in 5. The conference room was smaller than the squad room, with one long table, a whiteboard at the far wall, and a faint smell of stale coffee. Half a dozen officers were gathered, flipping through reports. Renwick sat at the end of the table, one arm draped over the chair beside him, looking entirely at ease. Blaine was beside him, flipping a pen between his fingers. Conversations dipped as Simone stepped inside. She didn't rush, just walked to the far side of the table, stopping so she was standing opposite Renwick. "Morning," she said. A scattered chorus of "Morning, Chief" went around the room. Renwick's was the last, his voice measured. "Morning." She let her eyes move over each face before settling on him again. "I wanted to thank you all for the welcome this morning. I'm looking forward to working with each of you. I expect professionalism on duty, respect for the badge, and accountability to the public we serve. Those aren't suggestions, they're the baseline." Blaine sat a little straighter, but Renwick's expression didn't change. "We're all on the same page about that, Chief," he said. "Been running things smooth here for years." "That's good to hear," Simone replied, her tone neutral. "But every department can improve. That's why I'm here." There was a subtle shift in the room, eyes darting between them, sensing the undercurrent. Renwick leaned back slightly. "Guess we'll see what needs fixing." Simone didn't blink. "We will. And I'll be assessing every aspect of how we operate, including how we interact with the community. That includes casual conversations in public spaces." For the first time, Blaine's gaze dropped to the table. Renwick's didn't move. "Casual conversations?" he repeated as though the phrase were foreign. "Yes," Simone said. "They matter. The way you speak to someone before you know their name says a lot about how you'll treat them when you do." The silence in the room thickened for a beat. One of the other officers shifted in their seat, clearly picking up on the tension. Simone turned to the group as a whole. "I'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next week. We'll discuss your current role, challenges you see in the field, and ways we can strengthen this department. I want honest answers, not rehearsed ones. We can only improve if we are willing to acknowledge what's not working." She glanced at her watch, then back to them. "That's all for now." Dismissed. Chairs scraped against the floor as the officers filed out. Blaine left quickly, muttering something about paperwork. Renwick lingered, taking his time gathering his folder. When the room was almost empty, he looked up at her. "You run things your way, Chief. Just remember, some of us have been here a long time." Simone met his stare. "And some of you will be here a lot longer if you adapt. We'll see which category you fall into." Renwick's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "Guess we will." He left without another word. Alone in the conference room, Simone took a slow breath. The line had been drawn, even if most of the department didn't see it yet. She didn't mind. She preferred to work without theatrics. Back in her office, she pulled a fresh sheet of paper from her notebook and wrote, "Renwick, direct challenge. Blaine, potential follower, not leader." Underneath she scribbled, "Monitor closely. Test under pressure." Through the window she saw Renwick and Blaine crossing the lot toward a patrol car, their body language loose, their conversation low. They didn't look rattled, not yet. But she knew the next time they crossed paths outside this building, it wouldn't be words alone that tested where they stood. Simone didn't wait long before arranging the meeting. Letting things simmer for too long only gave room for stories to twist and attitudes to harden. By mid-afternoon she sent Lydia a short message. "Have Renwick and Blaine come to my office now." The knock came 3 minutes later, firm but not hurried. "Come in," Simone called, setting aside a stack of case files. Renwick stepped in first, followed by Blaine. Both were in full uniform, radio mics clipped to their shoulders, the faint smell of coffee and the outside air still clinging to them. Renwick's posture was easy, his hands hooked on his duty belt. Blaine's was stiffer, his eyes briefly flicking around the office before landing on her. "Close the door," she said. Blaine reached back and shut it quietly. The click echoed in the small space. Simone leaned back slightly in her chair, studying them both. "Have a seat." Renwick took the chair directly across from her, Blaine choosing the one to his right. Neither spoke. She let the silence hang for a moment before cutting straight in. "Yesterday outside the diner you had some questions for me. Something about whether I belonged in this town." Renwick's lips pressed together in something that could have been a smirk. "Wasn't exactly a question, Chief. Just conversation." "Conversation," she repeated, her tone flat. "You pulled into that lot, positioned your vehicle close enough to block mine, and made a series of comments that weren't casual. They were calculated. You didn't know who I was, but you thought you knew enough to test me." Blaine shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Renwick's gaze stayed steady. If you took it that way, maybe it's because you were already looking for a problem. Simone leaned forward now, her elbows on the desk. I don't look for problems, Sergeant. I look for patterns. And what I saw yesterday was a pattern I've seen in officers who forget that the badge means service, not status. Blaine opened his mouth, then closed it again. Renwick glanced at him before speaking. With all due respect, Chief, you're new here. You don't know the dynamics. Sometimes you have to assert yourself with people, show them you're watching. She didn't blink. And who exactly were you watching yesterday? A woman getting out of her car to get lunch? That's not asserting authority, that's picking a target. The air in the room thickened. Blaine's eyes dropped to the floor, but Renwick held her gaze like it was a challenge. Simone straightened in her chair. This isn't about me taking offense. This is about the standard of conduct I expect from every officer under my command. If that's a problem for either of you, I need to hear it now. Neither spoke. Blaine's shoulders shifted, almost like a shrug he caught halfway through. I'll make it clear, Simone continued. You represent this department every time you're in uniform, whether you're answering a call, eating lunch, or parking your car. If the behavior I saw yesterday happens again to anyone in this city, there will be consequences. Formal ones. Renwick's jaw moved, but his voice was even. Understood. Blaine's was quieter. Yes, Chief. She let that sit for a moment. Good. Because I'm not here to play favorites or wage petty battles. I'm here to make sure this department serves the public with professionalism. That includes holding each other accountable, even when it's uncomfortable. Renwick finally leaned back, his chair creaking. Message received. Simone stood, signaling the meeting was over. You're dismissed. Go back to your duties. They both rose. Blaine gave a small nod as he turned toward the door. Renwick lingered half a second longer, his eyes still on hers, before leaving without another word. The door clicked shut. Simone sat back down, exhaling slowly. This wasn't settled, not by a long shot. She could tell by Renwick's stance, by the way his voice hadn't shifted from that measured calm. He'd heard her, but he hadn't accepted it. Blaine, on the other hand, seemed less certain of his footing now. That was something she could work with. She reached for her notebook and wrote, Meeting, clear boundaries set. Renwick, testing will continue. Blaine, observe for signs of shift. Outside her window, the afternoon light had started to tilt toward gold again. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and boots thudded down the hallway. She knew this wasn't the end of the confrontation, just the first round. But the next test wouldn't come in the safety of an office. It would happen in the field, where decisions had weight and the consequences couldn't be walked back. 2 days later, Simone decided it was time to see her officers in action. Not in a staged briefing, but on the street, where habits couldn't hide behind paperwork. She'd already scanned the patrol roster and chosen her pairing, Renwick and Blaine. If she wanted to take the measure of both men, there was no better way than watching them work together. She caught them in the garage just after they'd finished loading their cruiser. Renwick was checking the trunk inventory while Blaine entered their first stops into the onboard computer. Sergeant. Officer, Simone said as she approached. I'll be riding with you today. Blaine looked up quickly, then back down at the screen. Renwick closed the trunk with a solid thump. Your call, Chief, he said evenly, his expression giving away nothing. She slid into the back seat, the divider between her and the front only half obstructing the view. Renwick started the engine and they rolled out onto the street, the cruiser's tires humming against the pavement. The first call came over dispatch within minutes. A disturbance at a corner store on South Main. The voice crackled over the radio. Shop owner reporting a man refusing to leave after being asked multiple times. Renwick drove with practiced speed, taking a sharp left onto the main road. Guy they're talking about is probably Lester, he said to Blaine. He's in there every week causing trouble. Knows we can't do much unless he breaks something. Still need to make contact, Blaine replied. When they pulled up, Simone took in the scene. A narrow storefront with sun-faded posters in the window. The bell over the door jingled as a middle-aged man stepped outside, looking frustrated. Inside, a wiry man in a dirty ball cap stood near the counter, gesturing animatedly at the clerk. Renwick was first through the door. Lester, he called, his tone carrying the weight of long familiarity. What's going on? Just talking to my buddy here, Lester said, pointing at the clerk who shook his head. You've been asked to leave, Renwick said. Time to go. Lester looked past him, eyes narrowing at Blaine and then drifting toward Simone, who stood a few feet back, observing. Who's she? He asked. Not your concern, Renwick said quickly. Let's move. Simone stepped forward then, her voice calm but firm. Sir, the store has the right to refuse service. If you've been asked to leave, you need to comply. Lester's mouth opened as if he were about to argue, but something in her tone cut him short. He grabbed his worn jacket off the counter and headed for the door, muttering under his breath. Once they were back in the cruiser, Blaine glanced at Renwick. That went smoother than last time. Different circumstances, Renwick replied, eyes forward. The next few calls were routine. A traffic stop for a broken tail light, checking on a parked vehicle near the river. Simone stayed mostly silent, noting how Renwick handled drivers and how Blaine supported. Renwick's manner with the public was competent but clipped, his tone sharper with certain people than others. Blaine was more measured, occasionally stepping in to clarify or soften an interaction. Late in the shift, dispatch sent them to a call on the west side. Neighbor reporting loud shouting from a duplex, possible domestic dispute. As they approached, Simone felt the subtle change in both men's body language. Blaine straightened in his seat, scanning the street. Renwick's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. They parked out front. From inside the building came the sound of muffled voices, one clearly raised in anger. Renwick took the lead, knocking hard. Police, he called. Open the door. After a pause, the door cracked open to reveal a woman in her 30s, hair pulled back, eyes wide. She stepped aside to let them in. A man stood in the living room, hands in the air, talking fast. We're just arguing, nothing serious. Renwick's questions came quick, his tone verging on aggressive. Simone watched the woman's posture tighten. She stepped in, shifting the conversation toward the woman while Blaine spoke to the man. Within minutes, it was clear no assault had occurred, but the tension was real. Simone guided the woman into the kitchen, lowering her voice. If you ever feel unsafe, you can call us, even if it feels small. The woman nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. When they left, Simone noticed Blaine glancing at her as if weighing something. Renwick remained unreadable. Back at the station, she thanked them for the ride along and made a mental note of everything she'd seen. Patterns were becoming clearer, not just in their behavior, but in how they responded when she was present. But she knew the next crack in their armor wouldn't come from routine calls. It would come when pressure hit harder and faster than they could control. It was 2 days after the ride along when the shift in tone came. Simone had been in her office reviewing a week's worth of reports when a sharp knock hit her door. Before she could answer, Renwick stepped in. He didn't wait for permission to sit, just dropped into the chair across from her desk. We need to talk, he said, his voice edged with something more than formality. Simone set her pen down. About what? You, Renwick replied. And the way you've been shadowing my patrols. That's not leadership. That's hunting for mistakes. She leaned back slightly. Your patrols? They belong to the department, Sergeant. And I didn't shadow. I observed. There's a difference. He gave a humorless laugh. Yeah, the difference is you're looking for ways to call me out. And Blaine. Her gaze stayed locked on him. If I was hunting, I'd have already pulled the trigger. I'm watching because your behavior, both in uniform and out, sets the tone for officers who look to you as an example. That's part of my job. Renwick's jaw worked, his posture shifting forward. I've been here over a decade. I know this town, I know its people, and I know how to keep things under control. What I don't need is someone swooping in from somewhere else telling me how to do it. And yet here I am, Simone said evenly. Not because you're incompetent, but because departments stagnate when they run on autopilot. I was brought in to prevent that. He leaned in further, elbows on his knees. Autopilot kept crime down, kept the council happy, and kept my people safe. You think the mayor's gonna care if I said something in a parking lot? He cares that I keep the streets quiet. Her expression didn't shift. The streets aren't quiet if the people walking them feel they're being sized up instead of protected. What happened in that lot wasn't harmless banter, and deep down you know it. You just don't like being told so. For the first time, Renwick's gaze broke, flicking briefly toward the window. You think you can come in here and change the way I operate overnight? You'll lose half the room before you've been here a month. Then I'll earn it back, she said simply. Not by coddling egos, but by showing this department that respect isn't negotiable. The silence between them stretched. The sound of boots in the hallway passed, then faded. Renwick finally stood, his voice lower now. You keep pushing like this, Chief, and you're gonna find out how fast people can make your job harder. Simone rose as well, not stepping back. And you'll find out how fast I can replace people who refuse to adapt. I don't bluff, Sergeant. His eyes narrowed slightly. Neither do I. Before either could say more, there was another knock on the door. This time it was Blaine. He glanced between them, sensing the temperature in the room. Chief, Sergeant. Call just came in. Shots fired, possible armed suspect near the old train yard. Renwick's jaw tightened, but he turned toward the door. Let's move. Simone grabbed her jacket from the hook. I'm coming. The walk to the cruiser was silent. Blaine drove this time, Renwick in the passenger seat, Simone in the back. The air inside was thick, charged from what had just been said. As they sped toward the train yard, dispatch updates crackled over the radio. A witness reported seeing two people running between the rusted freight cars, one carrying a handgun. They pulled up to the gravel lot, the faint smell of oil and metal hanging in the air. The place was a maze of steel and shadows. Renwick stepped out first, weapon drawn, scanning the open space. Blaine moved to the opposite side, his voice steady as he called out, Police. Show your hands. Somewhere in the distance, feet pounded against the gravel. Simone moved with them, her eyes tracking movement between the cars. This wasn't the moment to hash out disagreements, but in the back of her mind she knew this was exactly the kind of high-pressure situation that revealed who someone really was. But before they could secure the scene, the night was about to hand them a test neither had prepared for. The train yard swallowed sound. Every step crunched over loose gravel, echoing faintly against the hulking freight cars lined in rows. The air was cool now, the late-day heat gone, replaced by the metallic scent of rust and oil. Blaine moved ahead, his flashlight slicing through the narrow gap between two cars. Renwick scanned the opposite side, shoulders tight, weapon low but ready. Simone kept a measured distance, eyes tracking every angle. A shout broke the quiet. Over here. Blaine's voice carried, sharp and urgent. Simone rounded the corner in time to see two figures bolting toward the far fence. One in a dark hoodie, the other in a faded green jacket. The hooded figure's arm jerked oddly as he ran, and in the flash of Blaine's beam, Simone caught the unmistakable outline of a handgun. Renwick didn't hesitate. Drop the weapon, he barked, his voice commanding enough to cut through the clamor of boots on gravel. No response. The two suspects split. Hoodie veered left between the cars, jacket went right. Blaine instinctively went after Hoodie and Renwick followed the one in green. Simone made a snap decision and went with Blaine. They pushed hard down the narrow path, Blaine's flashlight bouncing across steel walls as the suspect darted and doubled back. Then he tripped, hitting the ground with a sharp grunt. The gun skittered out of his hand, sliding under a car. Blaine moved in fast, knee pressing the suspect's shoulder to the gravel. Simone swept the area, making sure no one else was closing in, before stepping forward to help secure the weapon. The suspect, barely 20, was breathing hard, his voice cracking. I wasn't gonna use it, I swear. Blaine's voice stayed level. We'll talk about that after you're cuffed. From across the yard came Renwick's voice, low but firm, ordering someone to the ground. Seconds later, the radio crackled, suspect in custody. By the time they regrouped near the cruiser, both suspects were seated in the back, hands cuffed, eyes darting between the three officers. The weapon was tagged and secured, the scene stable. Simone stood beside the car, the adrenaline settling into her chest. Good work, she said, looking at both men. Blaine gave a short nod, still catching his breath. Renwick's eyes flicked toward her for just a moment before he replied, Everyone went home in one piece. That's the win. The ride back to the station was quieter than the drive out. The radio played soft static, punctuated only by dispatch updates for other units. Renwick sat forward in his seat, arms crossed. Blaine glanced into the rearview mirror a couple of times, his expression thoughtful. Back at the station, after the suspects were processed and statements taken, Simone found herself alone in the hallway with Renwick. He didn't look away this time. You handled yourself out there, he said simply. So did you, she replied. That's what I expect. Control. Clarity. No wasted motion. There was a pause before he added, Doesn't mean we're on the same page about everything. But I see you can back up the talk. She met his gaze. Good. Because this job isn't about agreeing on everything. It's about agreeing on the goal. Safety, respect, accountability. Renwick gave a short exhale that could have been a laugh or a release of tension. We'll see how it plays. Blaine appeared in the doorway then, holding a copy of the arrest report. Chief, just wanted to say, the way you talked to that kid in the yard. You got through to him. I don't think he expected that. Simone gave a small nod. Sometimes people listen when they're treated like more than just a problem. The three of them stood there for a moment, the air between them different now, less charged, more measured. When Renwick finally left for the night, he didn't say anything, but his glance back over his shoulder was telling. Blaine stayed behind to finish his report, his posture lighter than it had been all week. Simone returned to her office, jotting down in her notebook. Progress small but real. Trust takes action, not speeches. She set the pen down and leaned back, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. But she knew one good night didn't erase the line drawn in that first meeting. Tomorrow would be the true measure of whether it could be crossed. The next morning, Simone arrived earlier than usual. The station was still waking up, coffee brewing in the break room, a few officers moving between lockers and the report desk. She carried a folder under her arm, her uniform sharp, her expression unreadable. At 8:30 sharp she called a full department meeting in the squad room. Chairs scraped as officers settled in, their conversations tapering off. Renwick and Blaine sat side by side in the second row. Neither looked away when she entered, and that was a change in itself. Simone placed the folder on the lectern and looked around the room. Before we get into today's assignments, I want to talk about last night. And about this week. She didn't raise her voice, but the room was silent. The train yard call could have gone wrong in a dozen ways. It didn't, because each person involved stayed in control. That's the difference between a safe outcome and a tragedy. That's the difference between professionalism and recklessness. Her gaze moved deliberately across the room, pausing just long enough to meet the eyes of those who needed it most. Every badge in this room comes with authority, but it also comes with responsibility. You can't separate the two. How you speak to someone on the street before you know their name matters as much as how you act in the middle of a high-risk call. A few heads nodded. Blaine's pen tapped softly against his knee, then stilled. Respect, Simone continued, isn't a trick you pull out when the cameras are rolling or when you think someone matters. It's a habit. And if you don't practice it every time, you won't have it when you need it most. She let the words settle, then reached into the folder and pulled out a sheet. We're going to be updating our community engagement protocols. That means more visibility, more conversations with residents outside of calls for service, and more attention to the way we're perceived. This isn't about image, it's about trust. Renwick's arms were crossed, but there was no trace of the defiant tilt she'd seen earlier in the week. Blaine was leaning forward slightly, listening. I know change isn't comfortable, she said. I also know this department has a strong foundation. I'm not here to tear it down. I'm here to make sure it holds stronger than before. That only happens if everyone is willing to step up. No exceptions. She closed the folder. We all wear the same patch. That means the public sees us as one. If one of us breaks trust, we all pay the price. So we protect it. Every day. Every call. Every interaction. There was a brief silence before someone in the back, a veteran officer named Harlow, said, "Understood, Chief." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Simone gave a single nod. All right. Let's get to work. The officers filed out in pairs and small groups, some talking quietly, others heading straight to their units. Renwick lingered by the door, waiting until the last few had left. Chief, he said, his tone level. About what you said. Respect is a habit. That's not wrong. Simone studied him for a moment. It's not easy to change patterns, Sergeant. But it's easier when you've got the skill to back it up. You do. His jaw moved slightly, then he gave a short nod. Guess we'll see. Blaine stepped up a second later. Chief, I'm in. Whatever you're putting in place, I'll do my part. Good, she said. Because when this department gets it right, the whole city feels it. By mid-morning, the station was humming with routine again. Calls coming in, reports being filed, patrols rolling out. Simone stood at her office window for a moment, watching Renwick and Blaine head to their cruiser. Their conversation looked calmer now, less like strategizing against her and more like planning the day. She returned to her desk and opened her notebook, writing, "Step taken. Keep momentum. Lead by example." In her years on the job, she'd learned that leadership wasn't about one speech, one good night, or one confrontation won. It was about showing up every day in the moments no one planned for. And it was about making sure the people you led understood why the work mattered beyond the badge. The week had started with a parking lot test she didn't ask for. It ended with the first real sign that the test could turn into something worth building on. And for anyone watching, the lesson was simple. Respect isn't earned by who you are, it's earned by how you treat people. Especially when you think no one's keeping score.